How could refusing a simple family dinner lead to divorce papers being served at my office? I never thought keeping my husband's parents out of our lives would end with me losing everything, until the day he calmly handed me the envelope that destroyed my world. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The granite countertop felt cold under my manicured fingers as I scrolled through my phone, checking the guest list one final time. Our housewarming dinner was going to be perfect, exactly the kind of sophisticated evening that would cement our reputation in the neighborhood. I'd invited all the right people. My boss, Patricia, the Hendersons from next door with their Tesla and designer handbags, and of course, Phil Hayes, our most important client. Mirella, honey, I was thinking... Nate's voice drifted from behind me as he loaded the dishwasher. Maybe we should invite my parents to the dinner party Saturday. My fingers froze on the screen. I turned slowly, keeping my expression neutral even as my stomach clenched. Your parents? Nate, we've been planning this for weeks. The guest list is finalized. I know, but they've been asking about seeing the house, and Mom mentioned she could bring her famous apple pie. His brown eyes held that hopeful look I'd grown to dread. They'd love to meet your colleagues. I set my phone down carefully, buying myself time to think. Joanna and Martin Carter were sweet people, I supposed, but they were completely wrong for this dinner. Martin still wore the same threadbare suit jacket to every occasion, and Joanna had a habit of talking about grocery store sales and her vegetable garden. They lived in that tiny ranch house on the wrong side of town, the kind of place with chain-link fences and cars on blocks in the driveways. Nate, sweetheart, you know I adore your parents, I began, moving closer and placing my hand on his chest. But this dinner is really important for my career. Patricia will be there, and Phil is considering a major contract expansion. We need to make the right impression. His face fell slightly. What's that supposed to mean? It means we need to be strategic about who we invite. Your parents are wonderful, but they wouldn't be comfortable with this crowd. Think about it. Patricia was just promoted to regional director, and the Hendersons own 3 properties. Your mum would feel out of place. So you're saying my parents aren't good enough? The hurt in his voice made me wince internally, but I pressed on. I'm saying I'm protecting them. And us. I softened my tone, running my fingers along his collar. You've worked so hard to build your career, and I'm finally getting recognition at the firm. We can't afford to have anything seem unprofessional. Nate stared at me for a long moment. In the living room, I could hear our 8-year-old daughter Lillian watching cartoons, her laughter a bright counterpoint to the tension building in our kitchen. They raised me, Mirella. They sacrificed everything to put me through college. And look how well you turned out, I said quickly. But that doesn't mean they need to be part of every aspect of our lives now. We're in a different place, a different social circle. It's not their fault, it's just reality. I watched him struggle with this, his jaw working silently. Nate had always been conflict-averse, preferring to keep the peace rather than fight. It was one of the things that had attracted me to him initially. His calm, steady nature was so different from the volatile men I'd dated before. Maybe we could have them over for Sunday brunch instead, I suggested, pressing my advantage. Just family. Wouldn't that be more intimate and special? His shoulders sagged in defeat. Fine. I'll tell them the dinner is just for your work people. Thank you for understanding. I kissed his cheek, tasting victory. This is going to be such a wonderful evening. You'll see. As he walked away, I noticed the slump in his shoulders, the way he avoided looking at me. A tiny pang of guilt flickered through me, but I pushed it aside. I was doing the right thing. I was protecting our image, our future. Sometimes being the strong one in a marriage meant making difficult decisions. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Phil's contact. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed, "Crisis averted. They're not coming. Saturday will be perfect. His response came quickly. Good, looking forward to it. I smiled, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest that Phil's messages always triggered. He understood the importance of maintaining standards, of surrounding yourself with the right kind of people. Unlike Nate, Phil never questioned my decisions or made me feel guilty for wanting more from life. From the living room came the sound of Nate's voice, gentle and patient as he helped Lillian with something. He was a good father. I had to give him that. But being a good father and being the right husband for someone with my ambitions weren't necessarily the same thing. I deleted the message thread with Phil and opened my notes app, reviewing the menu one more time. Salmon with herb crust, roasted vegetables, a selection of wines that cost more than Martin Carter probably spent on groceries in a month. This was the life I'd worked for, the life I deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Amelia. How did Nate take it? Better than expected, I replied. He knows I'm right. Of course you are. You can't let his family drag down everything you've built. Dad would be proud of how you handled this. I smiled at that. My father, Isaac, had always taught me that success meant making hard choices, that you couldn't let sentiment cloud your judgment. He'd built his accounting firm from nothing by being ruthless about the company he kept and the image he projected. When he met Nate's parents at our wedding, I'd seen the barely concealed disdain in his eyes, the way he'd shaken Martin's hand with obvious reluctance, the polite but cold way he'd responded to Joanna's attempts at conversation. The sound of Nate's footsteps in the hallway interrupted my thoughts. He appeared in the doorway, car keys in hand. I'm going to pick up the wine for Saturday, he said without looking at me. The wine list is on the counter, I called after him, but he was already gone. I heard the garage door open and close, the sound of his car backing out of the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched him drive away, and for just a moment, I wondered if I'd pushed too hard. But then I thought about Saturday night, the gleaming dining room, the impressed faces of my colleagues, the way Phil would look at me across the table with those knowing eyes. No, I'd made the right choice. Sometimes love meant making sacrifices, and if Nate couldn't see that, well, that was his problem to work through. Monday morning at the office felt different somehow, charged with possibility. I'd spent extra time on my appearance, the navy blue dress that Phil had complimented before, my hair in the sleek chignon that made me look sophisticated and put together. The housewarming dinner had been a complete success. Patricia had been impressed with the house, the Hendersons had already invited us to their country club, and Phil had stayed until nearly midnight, helping me clean up while Nate put Lillian to bed. Good morning, gorgeous, Sarah Blake chirped as she appeared at my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee. My best friend since college, Sarah worked in marketing 2 floors down, but made it a point to visit me every morning. You're positively glowing today. Just feeling good about things, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Saturday night was perfect. I still can't believe you managed to keep Nate's parents away. That could have been so awkward. Sarah perched on the edge of my desk, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Can you imagine Martin trying to make small talk with Phil Hayes? The man probably doesn't even know what cryptocurrency is. I laughed, though something about her words made me slightly uncomfortable. It wasn't about keeping them away. It was about creating the right atmosphere for a professional gathering. Of course, Sarah agreed quickly. You're so smart about these things. That's why you're moving up and some of us are stuck dealing with boring husbands who never understand the bigger picture. Before I could respond, I caught sight of Phil walking past my office. He glanced in, caught my eye, and gave me that subtle smile that made my pulse quicken. Without thinking, I stood up and smoothed my dress. Excuse me for a minute, I told Sarah, and stepped into the hallway. Phil, good morning, I called softly. He turned, his grey eyes taking me in appreciatively. Mirella, you look lovely today. Thank you for Saturday night. I think it went really well. It did. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. Your husband seemed quiet, though. Everything okay at home? The concern in his voice felt genuine, intimate in a way that Nate's interactions with me hadn't felt in months. He's just tired from work. You know how it is. I do. Phil's hand brushed mine as he reached for some papers I was holding. Listen, I've been thinking about that Henderson account you mentioned. Maybe we should discuss it over lunch today. My heart jumped. That sounds professional. Very professional, he agreed, but his smile suggested otherwise. Chez Laurent at 1. Chez Laurent was the kind of restaurant where deals were made and careers were launched. It was also intimate, romantic, the kind of place where married women probably shouldn't have lunch with attractive clients. But this was business, I told myself. Networking, the kind of strategic relationship building that would advance my career. I'll see you there, I said. As Phil walked away, I noticed Sarah watching from my office doorway, her expression knowing and slightly envious. Lunch meeting, she asked when I returned. The Henderson account, I said, but I could feel heat in my cheeks. Right, the Henderson account. Sarah grinned. You know, Mirella, you deserve someone who appreciates your ambition. Someone who gets how hard you work. I wanted to protest, to say that Nate appreciated me, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, Nate didn't understand my drive the way Phil did. Nate was content with his steady software engineering job, his modest goals, his simple pleasures. He'd never pushed me to be more, never challenged me to reach higher. The morning crawled by. I found myself checking my reflection in my computer screen, reapplying lipstick, counting the minutes until lunch. When my phone rang at 11:30, I was so lost in thought that I answered without checking the caller ID. Mirella, it's me. Nate's voice sounded strained, tired. Oh, hi, what's up? I just got off the phone with my mum. She's really hurt about Saturday night. My good mood evaporated instantly. What do you mean? She heard from Mrs. Peterson next door that we had a dinner party. She saw all the cars in the driveway, the catering van. She's wondering why we couldn't include them in something so important. I felt a surge of irritation. Mrs. Peterson needs to mind her own business. That's not the point, Mirella. The point is that my parents feel excluded from our lives. Mum asked if she'd done something wrong, if they'd somehow offended you. Of course they haven't offended me. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Drama and hurt feelings over a simple business dinner. It wasn't just business, though, was it? The Hendersons were there. Lillian told me she played with their kids. I glanced around the office, aware that my voice was rising. Nate, I can't discuss this right now. I'm at work. When can we discuss it? Because my parents are talking about not coming to Lillian's birthday party next month. They don't want to impose where they're not wanted. That's ridiculous. They're being overly sensitive. Are they? Or are you being what? The words came out sharper than I intended. Being practical, being focused on our future, being the only one in this marriage who cares about advancing our social position. There was silence on the other end of the line. In that silence, I became aware that Phil was standing near my office door, clearly able to hear my side of the conversation. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, disappointment, concern. We'll talk about this tonight, I said quickly, lowering my voice. Will we? Because lately it feels like you've already made all the decisions, and you're just waiting for me to accept them. Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking slightly with anger and embarrassment. This was exactly why I'd wanted to keep his parents out of our business dinner. They created complications, drama, guilt trips that interfered with important things. Everything all right? Phil's voice was gentle, concerned. I looked up to find him in my doorway, his expensive suit impeccable, his presence somehow reassuring after the chaos of Nate's call. Family drama, I said with a weak smile. You know how it is. Actually, I don't. I make it a point to keep my personal and professional lives completely separate. It's the only way to maintain focus on what really matters. His words felt like validation, like permission to feel frustrated with Nate's inability to understand priorities. That's very wise. It's survival, Phil said simply. Are we still on for lunch? I glanced at my computer screen, at the work I should be doing, at the responsible choice that would be staying in the office and calling Nate back to work things out. Then I looked at Phil, standing there like an escape route from all the guilt and complications waiting for me at home. Absolutely, I said. I'm looking forward to it. As I gathered my purse and touched up my lipstick, I caught Sarah watching me with an expression that was part admiration, part worry. Be careful, she said quietly as I passed her desk. It's just lunch, I replied, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. It hadn't been just lunch for weeks now, maybe months. It was becoming something else, something that made me feel alive and appreciated in ways I'd forgotten were possible, something that was probably going to change everything. The reservation at Chez Laurent had been perfect. Intimate corner table, excellent wine, conversation that flowed effortlessly between business and something more personal. Phil had listened to my frustrations about Nate with the kind of focused attention that made me feel heard, understood, valued. When he'd reached across the table to touch my hand while making a point about surrounding yourself with people who elevate you rather than hold you back, I hadn't pulled away. Now, 3 days later, I was preparing for another dinner, this one a celebration of my recent promotion to senior office manager. I'd chosen Bella Vista, the trendy downtown restaurant with exposed brick walls and an extensive wine list, the kind of place that would photograph well for social media and impress the colleagues I'd invited. Are you sure about the seating arrangement? Nate asked as he adjusted his tie in our bedroom mirror. It seems odd to have Phil at our table when he barely knows anyone else. He's an important client, I said, fastening my earrings with hands that trembled slightly. And he specifically asked to attend when he heard about my promotion. It would be rude to seat him with strangers. What I didn't mention was that Phil had suggested the restaurant, had offered to handle the wine selection, had made it clear that he wanted to celebrate my success in a way that Nate, with his modest salary and simple tastes, never could. Mom, are we going to see Grandma and Grandpa tonight? Lillian appeared in our doorway, already dressed in the blue dress I'd laid out for her. Not tonight, sweetheart, I said quickly. This is a grown-up dinner for Mommy's work friends. But I told them yesterday that we were having a party. Grandma said she'd make cookies. My blood went cold. You told them what? About the party. I called them after school because Daddy said I could. I said it was tonight at 7. I turned to stare at Nate, who had gone very still at his dresser. Did you know about this? I told her she could call them, but I didn't know she'd mentioned tonight. This is a disaster, I muttered, grabbing my phone. I have to call them and explain that there's been a misunderstanding. But when I dialed Joanna's number, it went straight to voicemail. Martin's phone did the same. They were probably already on their way, dressed in their best clothes, carrying homemade cookies to a dinner where they would stick out like sore thumbs among my sophisticated colleagues. Maybe it won't be so bad, Nate said quietly. They could just stay for appetizers, meet a few people. Are you insane? I spun around to face him. Patricia will be there, and Phil, and the entire Henderson family. This was supposed to be elegant, professional. Your parents will show up talking about their vegetable garden and asking people what they do for work, like they're at a church social. They're good people, Mirella. They're proud of you. That's not the point. I was fully panicking now, pacing between our bed and the window. The point is that this dinner is about my career, my future, and having them there will completely change the dynamic. My phone buzzed with a text from Phil. Looking forward to tonight. Wore my best suit for the occasion. The thought of him seeing me with Nate's parents, of having to explain their presence, made my stomach churn with embarrassment. We have to go, I said finally. Maybe we can intercept them in the parking lot, explain that there was a mix-up. The drive to Bella Vista was tense and silent. Lillian chattered from the back seat about her day at school, oblivious to the storm brewing between her parents. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror obsessively, reapplied lipstick, tried to calm my racing heart. The restaurant was already busy when we arrived, the kind of fashionable crowd that made me feel like I belonged to something important. Patricia waved from a large table near the window, and I could see Phil at the bar, looking devastatingly handsome in his charcoal grey suit. "There's my star employee," Patricia called out as we approached. "Congratulations again on the promotion, Mirella. You've earned it." I felt a warm glow of pride as the table erupted in polite applause. Sarah was there with her husband. The Hendersons had brought another couple from their country club, and several colleagues from the office rounded out the group. This was exactly the kind of evening I'd envisioned: sophisticated, successful people celebrating my achievements. Phil appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne. "You look absolutely stunning," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Thank you," I whispered back, hyper-aware of Nate standing just a few feet away, making awkward small talk with Patricia's husband. We were just settling into our seats when I saw them through the restaurant's front window. Joanna and Martin, dressed in their Sunday best, Martin carrying a plate covered with aluminum foil. My heart sank. "Excuse me," I said to the table, and hurried toward the entrance. I reached the hostess stand just as they walked in, their faces bright with anticipation and pride. "Mirella, darling," Joanna beamed, reaching for a hug. "We're so proud of your promotion. I brought my famous chocolate chip cookies for dessert." "Mrs. Carter, there's been a misunderstanding," I said quickly, glancing back at my table where I could see Phil watching with interest. "This isn't actually a family dinner. It's a work event." Her face fell slightly. "Oh, but Lillian said—" Lillian was confused. She's 8. She doesn't understand the difference between family gatherings and professional celebrations. Martin stepped forward, his weathered hands adjusting his tie. "We don't want to intrude, Mirella. We just thought, well, we haven't seen you all in weeks, and when Lillian called—" I felt trapped, aware that my colleagues could probably see this awkward conversation playing out, that Phil was witnessing my in-laws in their discount store clothes with their homemade cookies. "I'm sorry, but there really isn't room," I said, my voice carrying further than I'd intended. "This table was reserved for a specific number of people." The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and obvious discomfort with the situation, cleared her throat. "Excuse me, is there a problem with your reservation?" "No problem," I said quickly. "These folks were just leaving." I saw the hurt flash across Joanna's face, the way Martin's shoulders stiffened with wounded pride. But I also saw Phil approaching, his expression curious and slightly amused. "Everything all right here?" he asked smoothly. "Just a small mix-up," I said, my cheeks burning. "Phil Hayes, these are Nate's parents, Joanna and Martin Carter. They were just—" "Leaving," Martin finished quietly. "We apologize for the confusion." But Phil was already extending his hand with that charming smile that made him so successful in business. "Any family of Nate's is welcome, I'm sure. Though I have to say, this place does get quite loud and crowded, not really the atmosphere for a relaxing family dinner." His words were polite, but there was something condescending in his tone, a subtle dismissal that made my face burn with embarrassment. I found myself nodding along, grateful that he understood the situation. "Perhaps another time," Joanna said softly, but I could see tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, another time," I agreed quickly, "when we can really visit properly." As they turned to leave, I heard Martin murmur to his wife, "Come on, Jo. We know when we're not wanted." The words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, they were gone, disappearing into the night with their untouched plate of cookies. "Awkward," Phil said quietly, but not unkindly. "Family can be so complicated." I nodded, unable to speak around the knot in my throat. When we returned to the table, I saw Nate's face, pale, stricken, furious. He'd obviously seen the entire exchange. "Where are my parents?" he asked quietly. They realized this wasn't the right kind of dinner for them, I said, forcing a bright smile. They'll catch up with us another time. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversation and expensive wine. I posted a photo of our table on social media. All of us laughing, glasses raised, the picture of success and sophistication. In the background of the shot, barely visible, was Phil's hand resting casually on my arm. I didn't notice it until later, when Nate quietly showed me his phone screen. He'd screenshotted my post, zoomed in on that telling detail. "We need to talk," he said simply. But I was already crafting my defense, already preparing to explain why he was overreacting, why his parents' feelings weren't my responsibility, why sometimes being successful meant making difficult choices that other people didn't understand. I had no idea that he was already making choices of his own. The silence in our house that night was deafening. Lillian had gone to bed confused and disappointed, asking repeatedly why Grandma and Grandpa had left so quickly. Nate had barely spoken during the drive home, his jaw set, in that way that meant he was trying to control his temper. Now we sat in our living room, me on the leather sofa I'd insisted on buying, him in the armchair that had been his father's, the one piece of furniture from his childhood home that I'd reluctantly allowed him to keep. "They drove 40 minutes to see you," he said finally, his voice quiet but strained. "My mother spent 3 hours making cookies. She was so excited about your promotion." "I know, and I feel terrible about the misunderstanding," I began, but he held up his hand. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mirella. You made a choice. You chose to humiliate my parents in front of your colleagues, rather than make room for them at a table that could have easily accommodated 2 more people." I felt my defenses rising. That's not fair. The reservation was set. The seating arrangement was planned. You can't just show up to a professional dinner and expect what? Common courtesy? Basic human decency? His voice was rising now, something that rarely happened. These are the people who raised me, who sacrificed everything to give me opportunities. They love you, Mirella. They've never been anything but kind to you. This isn't about them personally. It's about appropriateness, about understanding social dynamics. Your parents are lovely people, but they don't belong in my professional circle. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and final. I saw something change in Nate's face, a kind of recognition that made my stomach clench with unease. "Your professional circle," he repeated slowly, "including Phil Hayes. Phil is a client, an important client who specifically wanted to celebrate my promotion." "Is that all he is?" The question was quiet, but it felt like a trap. I thought about the lunches, the lingering conversations, the way Phil looked at me like I was something precious and exciting, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Of course that's all he is. What are you suggesting?" Nate leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I'm suggesting that you've been different lately, distracted. You spend more time on your appearance. You're always checking your phone, and you light up whenever his name comes up. That's called being professional. It's called caring about my career. Is it professional to have lunch with him twice a week? Is it professional to text him at 10 o'clock at night?" My blood went cold. "How do you—" "I pay the phone bill, Mirella. I see the itemized charges. Hundreds of texts and calls to the same number over the past 3 months. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our perfectly manicured front yard. "You're checking up on me now? That's what our marriage has come to." "Our marriage has come to me not recognizing my own wife. The woman I married wouldn't have turned away my parents like they were strangers. She wouldn't have cared more about impressing some rich client than about the feelings of people who love her." "The woman you married was naive," I snapped, spinning around to face him. "She didn't understand how the world really works, how success requires sacrifice and strategic thinking. I've grown up, Nate. Maybe you should try it." "Strategic thinking." He stood up slowly, his face pale. "Is that what you call it when you're flirting with another man in front of our daughter? I have never—" Lillian asked me yesterday why Mr. Hayes always makes you smile so much. She wanted to know if he was your boyfriend because you act different when he's around. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's ridiculous. You're being paranoid and jealous because Phil is successful and sophisticated and you're... I'm what, Mirella? Say it. I stopped, realizing I'd gone too far, but the damage was already done, hanging between us like a confession. You're not happy, I said finally. You're not ambitious. You're content with mediocrity, and you want to drag me down to your level. Nate stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something die in his eyes. Is that really what you think of me? Of the life we've built together? I think you're a good man who's settled for less than he could have, and I think you resent me for refusing to do the same. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd suspected. You're right about one thing. I am a good man, too good to deserve this. He walked toward the stairs, then paused. My parents called while you were getting ready for bed. They wanted to apologize for the confusion tonight. They felt terrible about showing up uninvited. The guilt hit me like a wave, but I pushed it down. I'll call them tomorrow and explain. No, he said quietly. You won't. Because you don't actually feel bad about what happened. You feel bad about getting caught. After he went upstairs, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the expensive furniture and carefully chosen decor that represented everything I'd worked for. I should have felt vindicated, justified in my choices. Instead, I felt hollow and defensive. My phone buzzed with a text from Phil. Hope the evening ended better than it began. Some people just don't understand the importance of maintaining standards. I stared at the message, wondering how he knew about the confrontation with Nate's parents. Then I remembered. He'd witnessed the entire thing, had even helped diffuse the situation with his polite dismissal. Thank you for understanding, I typed back. It's nice to have someone who gets it. Always. Sweet dreams. Beautiful. I deleted the message thread, as I always did, and went upstairs to find Nate already asleep, or pretending to be. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and telling myself that I'd done nothing wrong, that protecting my career and our social standing was the responsible thing to do. I had no idea that 3 floors below, our home security system was quietly recording everything, including my late-night departure to meet Phil at a coffee shop that stayed open until midnight. I had no idea that Nate was lying awake too, listening to the garage door open and close, checking the time on his phone, 11:47 p.m., and I definitely had no idea that he'd already started making calls of his own. 3 weeks later, I was feeling confident again. The awkwardness with Nate had settled into a cold politeness that was actually easier to navigate than his hurt questions and wounded looks. He'd stopped asking about my schedule, stopped checking my phone records, stopped trying to convince me to include his parents in our social plans. I told myself he was finally accepting reality. Phil and I had fallen into a comfortable routine of lunches and coffee meetings that felt increasingly intimate. He'd started calling me during his business trips, long conversations about everything from work to our dreams for the future. When he suggested we meet with a financial planner to discuss some investment opportunities he thought I'd be interested in, it felt like a natural next step. It's just preliminary, I told Nate over breakfast. Phil thinks there might be some good options for growing our savings. Nate looked up from his coffee, his expression unreadable. Our savings? Well, my savings, the money I've been putting aside from my promotion bonus. I see. He went back to reading his tablet, seemingly uninterested. What time is the meeting? 2 o'clock at Morrison & Associates downtown. Phil's meeting us there. Us? I felt a flutter of nervousness. Phil and me. He's the one with the relationship with the financial advisor. Nate nodded slowly. Makes sense. Good luck with it. His easy acceptance should have relieved me, but instead it made me vaguely uneasy. The old Nate would have wanted details, would have insisted on being included in any discussion about our finances. This new version of my husband was harder to read. and that made me nervous in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The Morrison and Associates building was impressive, glass and steel reaching toward the sky, the kind of place where serious money was managed. I felt sophisticated walking through the marble lobby in my best suit, my heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. Phil was waiting by the elevators, looking devastatingly handsome in his navy suit and silver tie. "You look incredible," he murmured, as we rode up to the 20th floor. "Thank you. I'm excited about this opportunity." "You should be. This could be the beginning of real financial independence for you." The phrase sent a little thrill through me. Financial independence meant freedom, meant not having to consider Nate's more conservative approach to money, meant being able to make choices based on my own ambitions rather than our joint limitations. The receptionist directed us to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I was admiring the view when the door opened behind us. "Mrs. Carter," a woman's voice, professional but not warm. I turned, expecting to see a financial advisor. Instead, I found myself facing a stern-looking woman in her 50s, holding a manila folder and wearing an expression that made my stomach drop. "I'm Jennifer Morrison, attorney at law. Thank you for coming." "Attorney?" I looked at Phil, confused. I thought we were meeting with a financial planner. Phil's expression had changed, become carefully neutral. "There seems to be some confusion." Before I could process what was happening, the conference room door opened again, and Nate walked in. But this wasn't the defeated, passive man I'd left at breakfast. This Nate stood straight, his jaw set with determination, his eyes cold and focused. "Hello, Mirella. What is this? What are you doing here?" "I'm here to serve you with legal documents." He nodded to the attorney, who opened her folder and withdrew a thick stack of papers. "Mirella Carter, you're being served with a petition for legal separation and a temporary custody order regarding your minor daughter, Lillian Carter." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Nate, what is this?" "This is me protecting myself and our daughter from the damage you're doing to our family." I looked around the room wildly, trying to make sense of what was happening. Phil had moved away from me, his face carefully blank, clearly wanting no part of whatever domestic drama was unfolding. "You can't be serious. Over a misunderstanding about dinner, over some text messages." Jennifer Morrison cleared her throat. "Mrs. Carter, you'll want to review these documents carefully. They outline the grounds for separation, which include emotional abandonment, financial deception, and adultery." "Adultery?" My voice came out as a squeak. "That's insane. You've never what?" Nate's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "Never had intimate lunches with Phil Hayes, never texted him at all hours of the night, never snuck out of our house at midnight to meet him." My face went hot. "Those were business meetings, professional conversations." "Were they?" Jennifer Morrison opened another folder and spread photographs across the conference table. These were taken by a private investigator over the past 3 weeks. I stared at the images in horror. There I was, laughing with Phil at Chez Laurent, his hand covering mine across the table. Another photo showed us standing close together outside a coffee shop, his hand on my lower back, in a gesture that looked unmistakably intimate. A third captured us in what appeared to be an embrace in a parking garage. "These photos don't prove anything," I said desperately. "We're friends. He's a client." "Is this how you treat all your clients?" Nate's voice was deadly quiet as he placed another photo on the table. A screenshot of text messages between Phil and me, including the one where he'd called me beautiful, and I'd responded with a heart emoji. I felt the room spinning around me. "How did you get those?" "Phone records are discoverable in divorce proceedings," Jennifer Morrison said matter-of-factly, "as are home security recordings." She produced a tablet and pressed play. On the screen, I watched myself leaving our house at 11:47 p.m. 3 nights ago, returning at 1:23 a.m. The timestamp was clear, undeniable. "This is entrapment," I said wildly. You set this up, brought me here under false pretenses. I brought you here because I wanted witnesses, Nate said calmly. I wanted your boss, your colleagues, and your friend Phil to understand exactly what kind of person you are. It was only then that I realized we weren't alone in the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see familiar faces in the reception area. Patricia from my office, looking shocked and disappointed. Sarah covering her mouth with her hand. And Phil, who had quietly slipped out during the confrontation, was now standing by the elevators, clearly desperate to escape. You've destroyed me, I whispered. No, Mirella, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure there would be consequences. Jennifer Morrison handed me a pen. You can review these documents with your own attorney, but the temporary orders are effective immediately. You'll need to vacate the family home by 6 p.m. today. Vacate? That's my house too. Not according to the mortgage documents, Nate said quietly. The house is in my name only, remember? You insisted on that for tax purposes. The irony hit me like a slap. I'd been so focused on protecting my individual assets, on maintaining my financial independence, that I'd never considered how vulnerable that made me. What about Lillian? Lillian will stay with me. You'll have supervised visitation until we can work out a more permanent arrangement. I looked around the room desperately, searching for some way out, some argument that would make this nightmare stop. But the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. And in Phil's hasty retreat, in Patricia's shocked expression, in the careful way Jennifer Morrison was documenting everything, I could see my entire carefully constructed life crumbling. I want to fight this, I said finally. That's your right, Jennifer Morrison replied. But I should warn you, your husband has been very thorough in documenting the breakdown of your marriage, and given your conduct with Mr. Hayes, particularly in front of your daughter, the court is likely to be sympathetic to his position. As I walked out of that conference room, past the shocked faces of my colleagues, past the elevators where Phil had disappeared, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and utter defeat. But even then, I told myself this was temporary. A setback, something I could overcome with the right strategy, the right attorney, the right approach. I had no idea that Nate's most devastating move was still to come. The cruiser's lights weren't even flashing. They didn't need to be. The message was clear. The second officer Martinez stepped out and tipped his hat, like this was just another Tuesday call. I still had my key in my hand when he said, "Ma'am, the locks have already been changed. You're not to enter." My father's face went the color of printer paper. Amelia kept muttering, "This is illegal, this can't be legal," until the officer handed her the court order and she read the part that said the house had never been in my name at all. Prenup, separate property, words I'd skimmed 8 years ago because Nate had smiled and said, "It's just paperwork, Mir. We'll never need it." Phil's emails were printed on thick cream stock, the kind he used for client proposals. I miss the way you say my name when no one's listening. Let's meet at the Hilton bar again. No one from the office goes there. I wish you'd leave him already. My own words, right beneath them, bold and undeniable. Dad tried to argue. Amelia tried to film it on her phone. The neighbors didn't even pretend not to watch. 5:58 p.m. Officer Martinez pointed at the stack of boxes on the porch, like he was directing traffic. "Those are yours. Everything else stays." I saw Lillian's small face in the window, her unicorn backpack on the chair beside her. She raised one hand, half wave, half plea. Then Nate's hand settled on her shoulder and turned her away. Jennifer Morrison stood beside him, holding the folder like a priest with last rites. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Phil's signed statement was clipped to the top. Mrs. Carter pursued me aggressively. I repeatedly asked her to stop. I feared professional repercussions if I reported her sooner. I wanted to scream that he was lying, that every lunch had been his idea, that he'd once traced the inside of my wrist under the table and whispered that Nate would never have to know. But the evidence was all one-sided, because Phil had always been smarter about covering his tracks than I ever was. 6 p.m. on the dot. I carried one box to Dad's trunk. My wedding album was in it, spine cracked, the corner of a photo sticking out, me in white, laughing up at Nate like he was the answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking. Mrs. Henderson watched from her porch rocker, iced tea in hand, lips pressed thin. The same woman who'd gushed 2 months ago about how elegant my dinner party had been. She didn't wave. Dad closed the trunk. Amelia hugged me so hard my ribs creaked. Neither of them spoke on the drive to the extended stay hotel off Route 9. There was nothing left to say. That night I sat on a bed that smelled like bleach and old cigarettes and opened the single box I'd managed to bring inside. On top was the framed photo Nate had packed last. The three of us at the beach last summer, Lillian between us, both of us holding one of her hands like we were anchoring her to the earth. I turned it face down. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Phil. "Sorry it went down like this. Take care of yourself." I stared at those 8 words until the screen went black. I had gambled a family, a home, a daughter's sense of safety, on a man who ended his betrayal with a platitude and a period. Somewhere across town, Nate was probably reading Lillian her bedtime story, the same one every night. Good night, moon. Good night, room. Good night, everything that used to be mine. I finally understood the difference between being desired and being loved. One of them leaves you dancing on tables, drunk on attention. The other builds you a house, stocks the fridge, changes the locks when you forget what home is for. I lost the second one trying to prove I deserved the first. And now the moving truck is gone, the porch light is off, and the key in my hand opens nothing at all.